The story kicks off with our protagonist, Takumi Aruma, suddenly finding himself face to face with the goddess Nolan. Before he can even process the situation, she hits him with a heartfelt, "My bad." Turns out, Takumi wasn't actually supposed to be here. His summoning was a complete accident. Apparently, when the Holy Sidonia Empire activated their summoning spell, it randomly grabbed a bunch of unfortunate souls from Earth to become heroes. The catch? Takumi wasn't supposed to be among them. His life was actually going just fine, but due to some cosmic clerical error, he got dragged along for the ride. Nolan explains that while the other summoned heroes were sent directly to Sidonia, she pulled Takumi aside to break the bad news. He's stuck here permanently. See, she was so furious at Sidonia for using a forbidden summoning spell that she immediately patched the whole system out of this world's magic laws. No more world hopping. The only problem? That also means there's no way to send Takumi back. Oh, and the process of summoning technically killed him, which seems like something that should have been mentioned earlier. Understandably, Takumi starts panicking over his newfound ghost status, but Nolan reassures him that she's got a plan. While she can't send him back, she can give him a new body and make him a proper citizen of this world. As an apology for the whole "oops, you're dead" situation, she even offers to grant him her blessing. With no real alternatives, since being a ghost forever isn't on his bucket list, Takumi agrees. When he checks his status screen, he finds out Nolan is setting him up with a 17-year-old body, even though he was 40. When he points this out, she just waves it off as an unimportant detail. More importantly, he needs to pick a job. She explains that he can either choose a combat job like swordsman, knight, or hunter, or he can go for a production job if he's not keen on getting stabbed. Takumi, who would rather not die again, quickly picks a production job. With the job implanted in his soul and a bunch of bonus blessings thrown in, Nolan yeets him down to the world below without so much as a tutorial. Takumi crash lands in a forest, groaning in pain but quickly realizing that, hey, no arthritis. Searching through the bag Nolan left him, he finds food, money, and the shocking realization that Nolan actually gave him a ton of useful skills. Among them, magic. Naturally, he decides to test it out. One quick spell later, a perfect water ball forms in his hand. Fire, wind, and earth magic all work just as easily. Feeling pretty good about himself, Takumi starts heading toward the nearest village. Along the way, he spots a really nice-looking stick. His appraisal skill tells him it's actually rare Trentwood that great for crafting magic staves and spears. Excited to test his skills, he uses his modeling ability to carve it into a spear. As he continues foraging, he gathers way too many useful plants and realizes he has no way to carry them until he remembers his item box skill. Just then, he hears a scream. Moments later, a panicked little girl bursts out of the bushes, begging for help. Before Takumi can ask questions, a massive horned rabbit charges straight at him. In a moment of sheer terror, he blindly swings his spear, accidentally stabbing it right in the head and killing it instantly. Stunned, he assumes Nolan's blessing made him overpowered. Nope, pure dumb luck. The world, however, rewards his unintentional combat prowess by slapping him with a warrior job title, which he absolutely did not sign up for. The little girl, Molly, thanks him and explains she got lost while picking herbs. When she mentions a nearby village, Takumi is thrilled and asks if he can tag along. Molly agrees, but suggests bringing the rabbit since its meat is delicious. Takumi, forgetting he planned to keep his item box a secret, casually stores the entire giant rabbit in front of her. Oops. Well, no going back now. Meanwhile, back in Sidonia, the other summoned people are dumped into the Empire's capital, utterly confused. Just as they start piecing things together, a regal woman approaches them, declaring them heroes destined to save this world. She introduces herself as Empress Elizabeth. One look at her, and the group collectively thinks, yup, she looks shady as hell. Among them, Akane, one of the summoned girls, suddenly activates her unique skill, Revelation. This divine ability allows her to instinctively sense the truth of a situation. Her gut reaction? Elizabeth is a backstabbing liar who absolutely cannot be trusted. Meanwhile, Takumi arrives at the Board Village, yes, that's its actual name, where Molly's parents, Bunga and Martha, welcome him with open arms. Since he has nowhere to stay, they offer to build him a house from scratch. Wanting to contribute, Takumi uses his earth magic to flatten the land, only to nearly pass out from mana depletion. The villagers are impressed, but also mildly concerned that their new guest might keel over at any moment. By the next morning, his house is fully built, and Takumi wastes no time testing his other skills. The local blacksmith Boron gives him a bunch of ores, so he tries his hand at alchemy. He successfully extracts iron, silver, copper, and even magical metals in an instant. The downside? It drains his mana like crazy. A few hours later, Molly finds him collapsed on the floor, looking like he's been sucked dry by a vampire. Fortunately, a quick recovery potion gets him back on his feet, though Bunga and Martha make him promise not to work himself to death. Over time, Takumi refines his skills, crafting weapons, tools, and even experimenting with potions. Using the herbs he gathered earlier, he whips up a health potion. But when he compares it to the standard village potion, his glows a brighter blue and radiates magic. He's not sure if that's good or terrifying, but there's only one way to find out. He's going to have to test it on himself. However, since he's not keen on accidental poisoning, he figures it might be a good idea to build up some poison resistance first. The best way to build poison resistance? Simple. Eat the poison until you're on death's doorstep, then heal yourself. Takumi has been doing this for hours now, and he feels absolutely miserable. On the bright side, he's spammed healing magic so much that he's unlocked the purification skill. Maybe it'll come in handy later, assuming he doesn't drop dead first. Just as he's recovering from this self-inflicted suffering, he hears something behind him. He turns around and, oh, that's a massive, very angry-looking boar. Not exactly the warm embrace he was hoping for. With no choice but to defend himself, Takumi grabs his spear, which promptly shatters on impact. Fantastic. Now he's panicking, throwing every spell he knows at the beast, but nothing is working. Things are going downhill fast, and just when he thought his luck couldn't get worse, oh look, a giant poison spider is lurking behind him, because of course it is. Takumi braces for a two-front battle, but instead of attacking him, the spider launches itself at the boar instead. The distraction saves him, but the boar is still very much in rampage mode. He needs a plan, fast. Since none of his attacks have worked so far, it's time to improvise. As the boar charges, Takumi leaps into the air, slaps his hands onto its head, and activates his alchemy skill. The boar's skull disintegrates instantly. Crisis averted. Feeling victorious and slightly traumatized, he turns to check on the spider, who looks like it's seen better days. Since it technically saved his life, Takumi heals the spider out of gratitude. And then, surprise, a notification pops up. He's just tamed the spider. He didn't even know that was possible. He's hesitant at first, because, deadly monster and all, but then the spider hits him with the old big cutesy eyes. He names her Maple. Later, Takumi returns to the village, casually dragging the boar carcass behind him. The villagers are amazed, both that he managed to take down something that huge and that he somehow tamed a poison spider. That night, they throw a massive feast in his honor, and everyone celebrates. Meanwhile, Bondo hands Takumi the valuable remains of the boar and suggests he take them to the nearest city, Bolton, to make some money. Sounds like a solid next step. Elsewhere, Goddess Nolan is watching all of this unfold like it's her favorite reality show. One of her fellow goddesses asks why she's giving Takumi all this special treatment. A custom body, a divine blessing, even sending him back a whole year before the summoning spell activated. But Nolan just shrugs. No grand scheme. No ulterior motive. She's just doing what feels right. Back in the village, Takumi wakes up one morning to find himself tied to his bed. Before he can panic, he realizes Maple is the culprit. Turns out she's been feeling neglected and just wanted his attention. Feeling guilty, Takumi decides to take the day off to play with her. Just as things are getting wholesome, Martha walks in, takes one look at the situation, and immediately assumes something weird is going on. Takumi scrambles to explain, and while Martha eventually accepts his excuse, she also notices Maple's silk looks really high quality. And just like that, Maple goes from lonely pet to walking textile factory. By the end of the day, Martha successfully crafts a spider silk shirt, and the village ladies are obsessed with it. Apparently, spider silk is a luxury material that only nobles can afford. Maple, now a one-spider industry, starts churning out more silk, but it means she won't get to play with Takumi anymore. He's a little disappointed, but there's still plenty for him to do. A month passes, and Takumi prepares to leave for Bolton to study alchemy. Saying goodbye isn't easy. He's grown attached to the villagers, but he knows it's time to move on. Before he goes, he sharpens his blacksmithing skills under Boron's guidance, crafting himself a chest plate and some steel-toe boots. Boron jokes that the boots will be great for kicking things, but Takumi insists he's not a fighter. Bunga, understanding Takumi's ambitions, arranges for him to travel with a merchant named Popek. The village is sad to see him go, but they know this is the right move. As a parting gift, Takumi leaves behind a stash of potions for emergencies. When Popek sees one, he nearly has a heart attack, because these aren't just regular potions, they're high-level stuff. Takumi, blissfully unaware, just waves it off. The whole village gathers to send him off, and as he hops into the carriage, they remind him that he'll always have a home here. Popek's other passengers introduce themselves: Heath, the blonde guy; Riel, the redhead; and Booger, the gloomy one. They're C-rank adventurers, currently acting as Popek's bodyguards, though it's been a boring job so far. Things get interesting when Riel notices Takumi clutching his bag protectively. Turns out, Maple is sleeping inside. When Riel asks to see her, a little too eagerly, she headbutts him in the face. Takumi apologizes, but the others laugh it off, saying Riel deserved it. Meanwhile, Maple takes an instant liking to Booger, which surprises everyone. Before they can get too comfortable, the horses come to a sudden stop. Outside, a horde of goblins is surrounding the carriage, clearly ready to attack. Bad news. But instead of panicking, Heath and his crew light up with excitement. Finally, some action. They tell Takumi and Popek to sit tight while they handle it. 20 goblins versus 3 adventurers? No contest. Riel picks off a few with his bow, while Heath and Booger clean up the rest with their weapons. In no time, the goblins are wiped out, and the team gets to work harvesting their magic stones. From what Maple has gathered so far, she's quite fond of Booger. Riel absolutely despises him. Heath, completely indifferent. After wrapping up their business, everyone piles back into the carriage and continues their journey for another 3 days until they finally arrive in Bolton. Upon entering the city, the members of Lion Fong make a beeline for the Adventurers Guild to report the success of their bodyguard mission. Takumi tags along, not because he suddenly has an urge to become a mercenary, but because he needs to register to stay in the city. Ideally, he'd sign up with the Alchemist Guild, but plot twist, there isn't one here. So now he's an adventurer by default. Hans, the ever-helpful receptionist, reassures Takumi that as long as he completes 1 easy quest per month, his membership won't expire. Basically, it's the gym subscription model of guilds. Takumi gets registered, introduces Maple as his pet, because why not, and moves on to his real mission, making money. His next stop is Popek's trading company to strike a deal on his potions. Turns out, he's sitting on 103 high-quality potions, and Popek is more than happy to buy them. 10 silver coins for each healing and stamina potion, 50 silver per mana potion. Takumi does some quick mental math, which may or may not involve using his fingers, and realizes this deal will net him over 7 million yen. He thinks that's a ridiculous amount, but Popek kindly informs him that if he had a reputation, he could have made even more. Encouraging. Since Takumi plans to set up shop in the city, Popek suggests he get a house with a workshop. Until this very moment, Takumi had not considered where he'd be living, which is, slightly important. Seeing his blank expression, Popek takes matters into his own hands and sends assistant Thomas to show Takumi some properties. Takumi expects a small, cozy workshop. What he gets is a mansion, a full-on, fancy, unnecessarily large mansion. He immediately assumes he can't afford it, but Thomas assures him it's within budget. Plus, no ghosts included, an absolute steal. After considering the attached workshop and his newfound wealth, Takumi decides to go for it. Thomas immediately starts the paperwork, and Takumi can move in the next day. But as they stroll through the city, a putrid smell assaults Takumi's nose. Thomas, completely unfazed, casually explains that it's the city sewers. Turns out, rich folks have magical sewage purifiers, but the rest of the city gets to experience the full medieval aroma. Since magical purifiers are rare dungeon loot, the city has to rely on priests for occasional cleanings, which, shockingly, is not enough. Determined to solve this medieval plumbing crisis, Takumi moves into his new house and gets to work. With some quartz, clay, and magic, he speedruns toilet manufacturing. The downside? His mana is completely drained, forcing him to chug a couple of mana potions like an overworked office worker downing coffee. The upside? He's just invented the modern toilet. Just as he admires his handiwork, a commotion erupts in the living room. He walks in to find Popek completely mummified in Maple's silk. Maple, bless her heart, thought Popek would enjoy this, and technically, the silk is quite comfortable. It even put him to sleep. But that doesn't make it right. Takumi apologizes profusely. Popek, still recovering from his unexpected spa treatment, decides to use the restroom, only to come back out in absolute awe. What is this marvel of technology? He demands. Takumi explains the concept of a self-cleaning, purification-powered toilet. Popek is impressed, but immediately realizes something. The only way Takumi could have made this is if he has light magic, and light magic is a big deal. Takumi remembers, too late, that Martha specifically warned him against revealing his light magic. He panics and asks Popek to keep it a secret. Popek agrees, but only if Takumi makes him 100 toilets. Takumi, exhausted from making just one, hesitates but eventually agrees, on the condition that Papek supplies the materials. That's when Papek suggests something unexpected. You should get a slave. Takumi, horrified, refuses outright. Papek, however, argues that if Takumi wants to keep his magic secret, hiring a regular worker is risky. Only a slave bound by contract would be legally unable to spill his secrets. Also, surprise, the Church of Divine Light would not be thrilled if they found out Takumi was giving commoners cheap purification magic. In fact, they'd probably try to abduct him. Reluctantly realizing he can't make 100 toilets alone and also adventure for the guild, Takumi caves. He agrees to buy a slave, but only because he has no other choice. Papek takes him to Mulan Trading Company, where the most ethical slave traders operate, which is a bit like saying the friendliest loan sharks. Papek goes to negotiate while Takumi steps outside, where he stumbles upon a stunning elf girl. The moment she sees him, she tells him, in no uncertain terms, to scram. Inside, Papek introduces Takumi to Mulan, the owner, and casually mentions that Takumi is buying a slave against his will. Mulan asks why he's so against it, and Takumi explains that in his homeland, slavery was abolished long ago. Mulan, unfazed, assures him that here, slave rights are well protected. It's basically a contract job, except, you can't quit. Mulan explains the different types of slaves: debt slaves, war slaves, and those forced into slavery by bandits. Papek suggests Takumi get a war slave, since they can't just up and leave. Mulan side-eyes him and demands to hear Takumi's reasoning himself. Takumi explains that he needs someone to manage his mansion and help with his work. Also, he needs a fighter to keep him safe. Mulan agrees to work with him, but there's no way she's letting him overwork a single person with both jobs. If he wants a housekeeper and a fighter, he's buying 2 slaves. First up is Maria, a well-trained, intelligent maid. Takumi, impressed, wonders why no one has bought her yet. Maria, flustered, warns him that she is strictly a housekeeper, nothing more. Takumi, confused, assures her he only wants help around the house. Maria, still skeptical, blurts out, "I won't sleep with you." Takumi turns beet red and quickly reassures her that is not on his agenda. Maria, still looking wary, agrees to work for him. Now for the battle slave. Mulan claims she doesn't have one, but Maria calls her out, pointing out that Sophia is still here. Mulan glares at her, but eventually admits that yes, there's an elf warrior. She just doesn't think Sophia is a good fit. Takumi meets Sophia and is stunned to learn she's over 50 years old. Elves age like fine wine, apparently. She has injuries, impaired movement, and has lost her elemental magic. Mulan considers her useless, but Takumi isn't convinced. Using appraisal, he discovers Sophia's stats are insane. If he can heal her, she'll be the perfect warrior. He tells Mulan he'll take her. Sophia, shocked, tries to warn him about her flaws, but Takumi assures her he can fix it. Mulan, intrigued by his confidence, agrees. The contracts are signed, and just like that, Maria and Sophia become his new employees / legally bound servants. Back at the mansion, Maple excitedly jumps on Takumi, causing Sophia to go full battle mode. Before she attacks, Takumi quickly explains that Maple is his pet, not an enemy. Maria and Sophia, after a moment of stunned silence, simply decide to roll with it. Later, Takumi shows them to their new rooms. Sophia and Maria are over the moon about their new home. So Takumi tells them that Sophia can take this room, and Maria can have the one next door. They're both completely stunned. Getting their own rooms? Unheard of. But Takumi shrugs it off. It's not like he's using them, so someone might as well get some benefit out of them. Oh, and by the way, there's a huge bath they can use whenever they want. That's all Maria needs to hear. She's practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. Later, the two of them soak in the bath, and Maria can't help but gush about how relieved she is that Takumi also bought Sophia. Honestly, she thought Mulan was never going to let her go. For 50 years, people offered ridiculous amounts of money for Sophia, and Mulan turned down every single one of them. So for her to finally sell her to Takumi, that must mean she saw something good in him. Sophia agrees that Takumi seems kind, but she's not completely sold on him just yet. They barely know anything about him, after all. In fact, when Mulan was writing up the sales contract, Sophia happened to glance at Takumi's file. And well, most of his background information, like his hometown, family, or anything important, was conveniently missing. She hasn't told Maria about this, but let's be real, that's suspicious. The guy's clearly hiding something. After their bath, they come out only to find that Takumi has already prepared dinner. Maria is devastated. She was hired to do household chores, and here's Takumi, just casually doing everything himself. If he keeps this up, she might as well be as useful as a decorative pillow. Takumi reassures her that he was just trying to make her first day a little easier. But if it really bothers her, she can handle the rest of the chores from now on. For now though, he just wants them to sit and eat together. Sophia hesitates. Eating at the same table as their master? That's not how things are supposed to work. Takumi, however, waves it off. He doesn't want to be the kind of guy who clings to outdated traditions. Speaking of which, the whole master thing? Yeah, he's not a fan. He asks them to just call him by his name instead. Sophia eyes him suspiciously. Is that an order? Takumi sighs. He doesn't want to force them if they're uncomfortable with it. Meanwhile, Maria's already casually calling him Takumi, like it's no big deal. The next day, Takumi heads to Papex Trading Company to pick up a package he ordered. The shopkeeper hands it over, all wrapped up nice and secure, but warns him to be careful carrying it home. On the way back, Takumi spots a nearby church and decides to stop in for a little chat with Nolan. He kneels to pray, thanking her for all the skills she gave him. Seriously, lifesaver. But there's something that's been nagging at him. See, the Holy Empire of Sidonia controls the religious doctrine here, yet Nolan seems to really have a problem with them. What's the deal? Before he knows it, bam, he's standing face to face with Nolan. Takumi freaks out a little, but Nolan's just like, chill dude, you called, so I showed up. As for the whole Sidonia thing, simple. There are two main religions, the Church of Creation, which actually follows Nolan's will, and the Church of Divine Light, which just kinda does whatever it wants. Sidonia belongs to the latter, and they've been using very aggressive methods to spread their doctrine. Nolan decided to stay out of human affairs, but in hindsight, big mistake. If she had interfered earlier, they probably wouldn't have been able to activate the summoning spell that brought Takumi here in the first place. Takumi is just staring at her. So basically, you stood by and did nothing until it was too late? Yeah, I may have dropped the ball on that one, Nolan admits. To make up for it, she blessed Takumi with a ton of abilities. But one of those blessings, his incredible luck, was only temporary. She basically gave him a beginner's tutorial by making sure he met only nice and helpful people. But now, training wheels are off. He's on his own. Takumi returns home, but the second he steps through the door, bam, he trips over Maple, who's absolutely thrilled to see him. Sophia and Maria rush over to check on him, but when Sophia reaches for the package, Takumi immediately stores it in his item box. No touching. Now that's suspicious. He then excuses himself, saying he'll be working in his workshop for a while, so they shouldn't disturb him. But Sophia's curiosity is through the roof. That package was wrapped in high-grade magical paper. That's not something you use for just anything. She decides to follow him, and what she sees nearly gives her a heart attack. Takumi is dipping a knife in poison and slicing himself open. She watches in horror as he immediately heals himself afterward. This dude is absolutely insane. And then, out of nowhere, Takumi mutters Maria's name. Sophia's eyes widen. Oh hell no. He's clearly planning something horrible for Maria. Without thinking, she lunges at him, only to collapse from sheer exhaustion before she can even swing. She lands right on top of Takumi, completely passed out. Takumi checks her status and realizes she's suffering from severe exhaustion, likely due to her curse. Healing her takes a ton of effort, but once he finally does it, his light magic levels up. Now that he has more power, he finally dispels her curse completely. A few hours later, Sophia wakes up, sees Maria, and immediately tells her to run for her life. Maria is confused, but then she holds up a mirror, showing Sophia that her body is healed and her magic is back. Sophia is stunned. She rushes outside to confront Takumi, and he casually confirms that, yep, he cured her. He promised to heal her, and he keeps his word. Realizing how wrong she was about him, Sophia kneels before Takumi and pledges her lifelong service to him. A few days later, they head to the Adventurers Guild to register Maria and Sophia. But while Takumi is checking out quests, some D-rank jerks overhear that he's only H-rank. They assume he's weak and immediately start talking trash, even hinting at some very bad intentions towards Sophia and Maria. Takumi is pissed, not just because they insulted him, but because they disrespected his friends. He steps up to handle it himself, despite the fact that he's terrified. One of the guys, a pot-bellied brute, throws a punch at Takumi with all his strength. Takumi lets it happen. The only problem? The guy's hand breaks on impact. The entire guild stares. Before things can escalate further, the guildmaster Barak arrives, demanding to know what the hell just happened. Seeing Takumi completely fine while the other guy is screaming in pain, Barak initially assumes Takumi started the fight, but the receptionist backs up Takumi's story. He literally just stood there and let the guy punch him. Barak is intrigued. He doesn't understand how Takumi did that, but he needs to find out. So he takes Takumi and his party aside for questioning. Takumi is a little uncomfortable about revealing personal skill information, but the guildmaster assures him that all this information will remain confidential. The guildmaster assures Takumi that everything he says will be kept confidential. Well, in that case, Takumi explains that when the guy threw a punch at him, he casually opened his item box, pulled out a little charcoal, and coated his upper body with it because, fashion and self-defense go hand in hand. Then, just for kicks, he synthesized that charcoal into diamond, which is why the guy ended up with a broken fist, while Takumi stood there looking unbothered. On that note, the guildmaster thinks it's only fair to bump Takumi up to D rank immediately. Clearly, the guy has skills, and if his rank is higher, maybe random morons will think twice before picking a fight just because he's surrounded by pretty ladies. Takumi, however, isn't so keen on a free promotion. Feels like cheating. Han suggests that if it really bothers him, he and his team can just take on a few tough quests to make the promotion feel earned. Sophia and Maria like the idea, so Takumi rolls with it. Their assignment? Exterminate goblins and kobolds while gathering more ill herbs. Sounds easy enough. Once they reach the forest, Maple, acting as the team's scout, alerts them to a group of 4 goblins up ahead. Sophia, always eager to flex her sword skills, dashes forward and slices through 2 of them in one swing. The other 2 don't fare much better. Maple trips them up with her web, and before they can even curse their luck, Takumi and Maria finish them off with quick stabs to the neck. Takumi's impressed with their efficiency, but something feels off. There are way too many monsters around. With nearly 100 goblins and kobolds down, Sophia suspects they've stumbled onto a monster encampment. And where there's a monster encampment, there's probably a goblin general lurking around. That's a C-rank monster, typically requiring 5 D-rank parties to take down. But Sophia is confident that between her spirit magic, Maria's earth magic, and Takumi's elemental magic, they should be able to handle it. Takumi, being the cautious one, isn't so sure. But since Maria and Sophia seem so confident, he decides to trust them. Plus, they still have Maple on their side. That is, until Maple casually drops a bombshell. She's about to evolve and needs to bow out of the fight. No big deal, right? Takumi, totally unfazed, just opens a pocket dimension for her to rest in, because apparently, he can do that now. Sophia and Maria are understandably shocked and demand an explanation, but Takumi brushes it off like it's just another Tuesday. With Maple temporarily out of commission, Takumi warns the team they'll have less backup, but Sophia is still confident they can pull this off. They reach the goblin camp and do a quick head count. Around 400 goblins. Takumi, understandably, is not thrilled. Do we really have to fight all of them? He asks. Sophia, ever the tactician, has good news. Since there are no humans around, they can just nuke the place with magic. That's more like it. The 3 of them charge up their strongest spells and unleash absolute destruction on the camp. By the time the dust settles, only the goblin general and a handful of goblin knights remain. Sophia calls dibs on the knights, leaving Takumi to deal with the general. Instead of using his spear, he takes the easy route and just sets it on fire. Problem solved. With all the goblins wiped out, they collect the magic stones and drag themselves back to the guild, utterly exhausted. Han can't believe they cleared the quest and took down a goblin general before lunchtime. The guildmaster wants a word though, so they head to the meeting room. Barak, the guildmaster, is a mix of impressed and furious. He's about to lay into Takumi for taking on an entire goblin camp with just one party when Takumi's pocket dimension casually opens up and out pops Maple, now evolved into an arachne. The room erupts with excitement over her new form, and Barak, realizing this party is anything but normal, decides to let the whole reckless battle thing slide. Once they're back home, Maria asks if Takumi has any spare cloth to make underwear for herself and Sophia. Takumi, ever the innovator, has a better idea. He'll make it for them himself, because nothing screams warrior like custom underwear design. Just as he's about to get started, Maple pops out of the pocket dimension again, announcing that Pepek has come to see him. Takumi goes to meet him and gets some interesting news. Lord Marcus Godwin of Bolton wants to have a chat. Takumi would really rather not, But given the circumstances, he doesn't have much choice. When he arrives at Godwin's castle, he braces for the worst. But surprisingly, Godwin is actually pretty reasonable. The first thing he does is thank Takumi for improving the town's sanitation with his toilet inventions, because hygiene matters. Then, he acknowledges that Takumi did the kingdom a huge favor by wiping out the goblin camp before it became a problem. He warns Takumi that Sidonia will definitely come after him at some point, so he should be careful. A few days later, Takumi finally finishes making the underwear, but the project ended up being way more complicated than he expected. He looks absolutely drained. Sophia and Maria, however, are thrilled with the results and love the design. In his exhaustion, Takumi absent-mindedly asks if they want to try them on now, so he can see how they fit. A second later, he realizes how that sounded, panics, and runs out of the room. Sophia and Maria, a little disappointed, exchange looks, because honestly, they totally would have done it if he'd stayed. Needing a new project to clear his mind, Takumi decides to invent refrigerators. Once they're done, he proudly explains to the girls that they'll keep food cold so it won't spoil. They're fascinated by the cold air coming from the fridge, but unfortunately, Takumi's fridge can't run Halo. Maria, on the other hand, is just happy she can now cook with fresh ingredients. Takumi gives one fridge to Maria and sends 2 to Pepek for sale. With that handled, he turns his attention to upgrading their equipment. The fight with the goblins made him realize their gear could use some improvements. He wants to craft new sets out of mithril and adamantite. The problem? Those metals are rare, and there aren't many blacksmiths who can work with them. Hans suggests that if Takumi wants to get his hands on mithril and adamantite, he should head to a city called Horus near the kingdom of Barcula. The catch? The mines are off limits to anyone who isn't a blacksmith. But, hypothetically speaking, if Takumi just so happened to accept a quest to exterminate the monsters in the mines and, conveniently stumbled upon some rare metals along the way, well, who's going to stop him from mining a little for himself? The guildmaster appears out of nowhere with a perfect quest, gathering traitwood near the Horus mines. And while Takumi's at it, he'll need to escort someone, because of course, there's always more work. Takumi tries to pawn the escort duty off on Lion Fong, but they're busy with another mission, so the job's on him. He asks how long the journey will take, and Hans tells him that a horse-drawn carriage would take 7 days, but a monster horse could cut that time down to 4. Takumi loves the idea, but Riel pops in to burst his bubble. Lion Fong already took all the monster horses. Riel, fresh from a quest, has brought back a black buffalo before it spoils. Since he's staying in town for the night, Takumi invites him over for a bath. Riel, excited at the prospect of an actual bath, eagerly accepts. But before heading home, Takumi stops by Pepek's company and manages to convince him to lend a couple of monster horses for the mission. In return, Pepek asks for a cut of the ores Takumi finds in the mines. Also, about that fridge Takumi sold him earlier, Pepek loves it and wants more. Takumi sighs, already sensing that he's never going to get a break. Meanwhile, over at Takumi's mansion, Sophia is pacing around like a worried mother hen, convinced something terrible must have happened to him. Hours later, Takumi finally strolls back home with Riel, apologizing for dragging him along on such a long errand. Riel, ever the trooper, shrugs it off, but just as he's about to say something reassuring, his instincts scream danger. Someone is watching them with enough hostility to melt steel. Riel sizes up the unseen threat and immediately knows, yeah, he's not winning this one with his current gear. Thinking fast, he grabs Takumi's hand and bolts, only for their pursuer to close the distance in seconds and deliver a brutal kick straight to Riel's face. The attacker? None other than Sophia, who has convinced herself that Riel is some sketchy kidnapper trying to spirit Takumi away. Her sword is already drawn, and she's fully prepared to cut Riel down without hesitation. Before Sophia can turn Riel into a tragic backstory, Takumi jumps in, frantically explaining the misunderstanding. Once she realizes she nearly turned Riel into minced meat for no reason, Sophia drops to her knees in apology. Riel, still nursing his bruised ego and face, forgives her. But his curiosity about Takumi's situation is now at an all-time high. That curiosity only grows when they reach Takumi's house, and Riel is greeted by more cute girls. He demands answers. Takumi, with a completely straight face, explains that he needed a maid and a bodyguard, so he hired Sophia and Maria. And then there's Maple, who evolved at some point and is now in a new form. Riel is excited to see Maple again, until she glares at him with the same level of affection one reserves for a cockroach. This is where things really start to sting for Riel. Booger and Heath already have wives, and now even Takumi has two beautiful women in his house. Meanwhile, Riel remains single. When Takumi clarifies that he isn't dating either Sophia or Maria, Riel sees his chance and immediately asks Sophia out. She shoots him down instantly. Maria does the same. Riel, once again, takes an L. Later, as he sulks in the bath, Takumi is busy discussing a new mission with Sophia and Maria, one that involves mining for mithril and adamantite. Sophia thinks it's a great idea, and with everyone on board, Takumi sets their departure for 3 days later. The next morning, Riel takes off to reunite with the rest of Lion's Fong, and with him gone, Takumi starts crafting some new gear. His latest project? A magic-draining tungsten carbide sword. It's an amazing weapon, but it's ridiculously huge. Unfortunately, the sword resists his alchemy, turning what should have been an easy task into a full-blown battle of wills. Eventually, Takumi succeeds and forges 2 separate blades, both of which drain an opponent's mana with every cut. He's thrilled with the result, less thrilled about how drained he feels afterward. 3 days later, the crew meets up with Pepek to collect their carriage, where they also meet the guy they're supposed to escort, Gambo. The journey begins, but first, they need to stop by a forest to hunt tramps. Sophia quickly spots one trying and failing to blend in with the other trees. Takumi charges in to chop it down, with Sophia and Maria providing backup. One Trent down, a whole forest to go. Since fighting them one by one is inefficient, Sophia suggests using magic, which works like a charm, until an elder Trent shows up and refuses to die. No matter how much magic they throw at it, the only way to take it down is to cut through its main body in a single strike. Takumi coats his sword in fire while Sophia and Maria cover him, and with one clean slash, the elder Trent finally falls. Mission accomplished, time to move on. Upon reaching Horus, they head to the Adventurers Guild, where Gambo points out a quest requiring extermination of mole monsters in the mines. These little pests eat ores, making them a serious problem. Plus, taking the quest gives them access to the mines. Win-win. Not long after they start mining, they strike gold, or rather, mithril and adamantite. Unfortunately, the ores also attract the attention of the mole monsters. Before the creatures can attack, Takumi flashes a light spell, blinding them instantly and making them easy pickings. While effective, his method leaves Sophia and Maria slightly disappointed. They were hoping for more action. After successfully mining, they return to Bolton, where Takumi visits Gambo's shop to learn how to refine the ores. The process is tedious, but after much effort, Takumi crafts high-quality mithril and adamantite, which he uses to create new, magic-infused gear for Maria and Sophia. The girls are amazed by how lightweight yet durable their armor is, and it even enhances their elemental abilities. Takumi's own armor is imbued with Thunderclap, an extreme agility buff. Ready to show off, he attempts a flashy speed move, only to immediately crash face-first into a wall. Moving on, and pretending that didn't happen, Takumi presents the new weapons he made. Sophia and Maria love their new spears, but Sophia has one more request. She wants a shield so she can protect Takumi more effectively. He agrees, but reminds her that her own life is just as valuable as his. Meanwhile, Nolan has been observing everything, pleased with Takumi's progress, knowing he'll need every ounce of strength for the battles ahead. 1 year into the future, where the other heroes were summoned, Akira and Yamano have completed their training and are now on a mission for the King of Samander. They look pretty evil now. Back in the present, Takumi finally finishes Sophia's shield. She's grateful but feels bad seeing how exhausted he is. She wishes he had an assistant to help with his workload. Meanwhile, over in the royal capital, a problem is brewing. The Lord receives a letter from Sidonia. Word has spread about Takumi's purification magic toilets, and the Church of Divine Light is not happy. Though they don't know who Takumi is yet, they plan to take action against him. Said action involves sending a church messenger to demand that the king of Barkula hand over the purification magic patent. The church claims that purification magic is a divine gift and should be exclusively controlled by them. Oh, and they also want the king to snitch on whoever created these devices. The king, seeing right through their nonsense, flat out refuses. The messenger is appalled at the king's audacity and threatens to recall all priests from Barkula. The king calls his bluff and tells him to go right ahead. Takumi later hears about this and is relieved that the king didn't rat him out, but he's also worried about the repercussions of angering the church. Pepek reassures him that the Church of Divine Light isn't the only religion around. There's also the Church of Creation, which actually provides healing magic to everyone for free. unlike the greedy Divine Light Church, which charges insane prices for holy magic. The Church of Divine Light might have Sidonia's backing, but their influence isn't as absolute as they think. Anyway, Pepek didn't just come to chat about religious politics. He has news. He presented Takumi's toilet and refrigerator to the king, who was so impressed that he wants to meet Takumi in person. Takumi, wary of dealing with royalty, hesitates. Pepek assures him it's not a royal decree, so he can refuse if he wants, but Pepek would really prefer if he accepted. Takumi eventually agrees, and that evening, he tells Sofia and Maria about the upcoming trip to the royal capital, Bacalados. Both are excited to go with him, so they set their departure for a week later. In the meantime, there's a lot to prepare. Maria needs to stock up on food, and Takumi plans to craft new cloaks for them using dark element magic stones from Pepek, which will let him enchant the cloaks with perception-blocking magic. That kind of spell would be a total game changer in combat, but Takumi has a different motivation. When they make it to the royal capital, he wants to make sure Sofia and Maria don't have to deal with unwanted attention. Later, the two head out to do some shopping, and while browsing for fruit, Maria grumbles about Takumi's lack of self-confidence. Sofia agrees, rattling off his long list of amazing qualities. Handsome, brilliant at alchemy, a genius inventor, the whole package. She's so passionate about it that Maria starts to get a sneaking suspicion. Could Sofia actually be in love with Takumi? Sofia immediately shuts it down, insisting that her feelings are purely out of respect for him as her master. But Maria isn't buying it. She can smell romance brewing from a mile away. Meanwhile, Takumi is back at the town church, kneeling in front of the statue of Nolan to pray. Suddenly a beam of light engulfs him, and before he knows it, he's standing in Nolan's divine realm. The goddess greets him warmly. It's been a while since they last spoke, and she's already heard about his invitation to the royal capital. If he's here to pray for a safe journey, he better have brought an offering. Takumi, however, is here for answers, not handouts. The Church of Divine Light worships a goddess named Annette, so he asks Nolan if there really is another goddess besides her. Nolan scoffs. Of course not. She's the only real goddess around. But if that's the case, then who or what is Annette? Nolan, playing it mysterious, tells him he'll find out when the time is right. Switching gears, Takumi asks about the other heroes who were summoned with him. It's been 10 months since he arrived, but there hasn't been a peep about any otherworldly heroes. Nolan sheepishly admits that she may have, tampered with time a little. She actually sent Takumi 1 year into the past, meaning the other heroes haven't even been summoned yet. Takumi, understandably confused, asks why she went through all that trouble, but Nolan suddenly declares that his time is up. No more questions for today. Oh, and next time, he'd better bring sweets. Takumi protests, but Nolan chops him on the head, knocking him straight back to the mortal realm. When he comes to on the church floor, he gets the distinct feeling that Nolan was dodging his questions about the other heroes. But honestly, he wasn't planning on getting involved with them anyway, so whatever. He heads home to finish the cloaks he was making for Sofia and Maria, and when he gives them the final product, they're thrilled with the design. Takumi is pleased, but his work isn't done yet. He's got another project in mind. He takes them to his workshop and unveils his next big plan, building a carriage. With all their recent travels, it only makes sense to have their own ride, rather than constantly borrowing one. Of course, even if he builds the carriage, he still needs a horse. His plan? Borrow one from the guild. Maria, however, thinks that's a waste of time. Instead, why not just go to the Forest of Death outside Bolton and snag a unicorn or a drake horse? Way faster than any regular monster horse. Excited at the prospect, she's ready to head out immediately. Takumi, on the other hand, feels a creeping sense of unease. As they journey into the forest, Takumi asks Sofia if drake horses are really that much better than the monster horses from the guild. She confirms that drake horses are leagues ahead, faster, stronger, and far more durable. Plus, they look like normal horses, except for their massive rhino-like horns and dragon scales. Not exactly subtle. Just then, Maple urges them to hurry up. She's eager to get a new friend once Takumi forms a familiar contract with a horse. Before they can catch up, though, Sofia senses a monster nearby. She readies her sword, but when a bush wolf bursts from the underbrush, it sprints right past them instead of attacking. Takumi smugly points out that the anti-perception cloaks are working perfectly. Sofia, impressed but practical, suggests taking them off. After all, they won't be able to fight monsters if the monsters can't see them. Sure enough, the moment she removes the cloak, she slays a wild boar in one strike. Maria is delighted, already planning to cook up the meat for their trip. Meanwhile, Maple is growing impatient. But before they can move on, Takumi notices a fallen tree and, like a true craftsman, immediately thinks about using the wood for his carriage. He and Sophia get to work chopping it up, while Maria busies herself with preparing the boar meat. Maple, fed up with waiting, decides to go ahead alone to find a horse. As she ventures deeper into the forest, Maple notices an unusual number of dead trees. Something definitely isn't right. Eventually, she stumbles upon a drake lying on the ground, badly injured. She approaches cautiously, asking if it's hurt, only for the drake to immediately launch a lightning strike at her. She dodges easily and quickly realizes the drake is just scared. She recognizes that feeling. It's the same way she felt before Takumi took her in. Gently, she tells the drake not to worry. Her master is a kind person, and he'll help it once he arrives. Unfortunately, waiting peacefully isn't an option. Two termite monsters appear, and they do not look friendly. Maple quickly deduces that they're the ones who hurt the drake. Without hesitation, she ensnares them in her silk and tosses them toward the drake, which fries them with a lightning bolt. But there are more coming, and things aren't looking good. To buy time, Maple weaves a silk barrier, but she knows it won't last forever. She tries to call Takumi telepathically, but there's no response. Is he seriously still distracted by that tree? As the termites start breaking through, Maple braces herself for the worst. But just as she closes her eyes, ready to accept her fate, Takumi appears, standing over her. Relieved beyond words, Maple leaps into his arms. She was so scared when he didn't answer. Takumi explains that her silk barrier was the problem. It was so well woven that it blocked mana signals too. The moment he realized he lost her signal, he rushed over. He notices the wounded drake, and Maple pleads with him to save it. He extends his hand, but the drake, still wary, repels his magic. Sophia warns that they need to leave before more termites arrive. If they leave the drake here though, it won't survive. Takumi makes a snap decision. He'll store it in his pocket dimension and deal with it later. Sophia warns him that storing a high-level beast without a contract will put enormous strain on him. Takumi, ever the optimist, says he'll be fine. Spoiler, he was not fine. The second the drake enters his pocket dimension, Takumi passes out cold. Even after they bring him home, he doesn't wake up for 12 hours. Worse, as long as the drake is inside, his mana keeps draining. He'll wither away at this rate, and since he's unconscious, he can't release it. Thinking fast, Sophia contacts Maple inside the pocket dimension. Maple agrees to open it, but she warns that the drake will panic if it suddenly appears in an unfamiliar place. She sets up a tent outside to keep it calm. Once the drake is free, Takumi's mana should recover. In the meantime, Maria heads out for medical supplies while Sophia stays by Takumi's side. That night, Takumi finally wakes up and heads outside to check on the drake. Maple has been keeping it company, telling it all about him. Seeing that Maple trusts Takumi, the drake agrees to form a contract. Now that the bond is official, Takumi immediately heals its wounds. In an instant, the drake is back on its feet, fully recovered. But now, Takumi has a new dilemma: naming it. Since Maple is named after a leaf, he decides to stick to a plant theme. He names the drake Camellia, after the tree that stays green all year. With the crisis resolved, Maria calls everyone inside for dinner. After all, Takumi hasn't eaten in an entire day, and she made a feast. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a beast girl named Reva is meeting with a potential master at a slave trading company. The man is impressed by her magical abilities, but needs someone with more practical skills. Reva promises to work hard and improve, but the man declines. He needs someone who can help right away. Though he won't buy her, he wishes her luck in finding a master. Once the client walks away, Reva turns to Pullum with an apologetic look, feeling bad that he got rejected yet again. But Pullum, ever the optimist, just shrugs it off, telling her not to worry. Sooner or later, the right master will come along. Reva tries to hold on to that hope, but let's be real. She's been here for years and still hasn't found anyone willing to take her in. She can't help but think back to her old life with her younger brother and the desperate choice she made to sell herself into slavery just to provide for her family. And yet, after all this time, she hasn't even made a single cent. Talk about a bad investment. Meanwhile, over at Takumi's place, he's still grinding away on his latest project, his carriage. Maria, watching his non-stop hustle, is starting to get worried. She asks if he's planning to go back to Dagambo's workshop today. And sure enough, Takumi says he has to. There's still a ton of blacksmithing work to do before the big trip. Sophia chimes in, pointing out that between finishing the carriage, making potions, and building refrigerators for Paypek, he's basically running himself into the ground. And considering the fact that the guy hasn't taken a single break in days, she's genuinely worried he might end up working himself into an early grave. Takumi appreciates the concern, really, but he assures them he's totally fine and heads out as planned. First stop, the guild. As soon as he walks in, he's met with the sound of a man desperately trying to convince the guildmaster that he saw something absolutely horrifying. Intrigued, Takumi strolls up to the front desk and asks Hans what all the commotion is about. Turns out, there have been several reports of a strange creature lurking around outside. Takumi asks for a description, but no one actually knows what it looks like. Hans, however, has drawn a sketch based on the terrified witnesses' accounts. Even with the sketch, it's still a bit of a mystery, but since there haven't been any damage reports, Hans isn't too concerned. He then turns to Takumi and asks what brings him to the guild today. Takumi casually mentions that he's here to register his new pet. Hans, already expecting something weird given Takumi's track record, is still caught off guard when Takumi pulls Camilla out of his pocket dimension. The second Hans lays eyes on her, he glances down at his sketch and... oh no. Turns out, the terrifying monster everyone's been freaking out about is none other than Takumi's new pet. Cue the guildmaster dragging Takumi into a meeting to give him a thorough scolding while Takumi begs for mercy. Meanwhile, Sophia is out in town after meeting with Mulan. She had hoped Mulan would have some magically skilled slaves who could help Takumi with his work, but unfortunately, no luck. Instead, Mulan suggests she check out other slave traders in the area. As Sophia heads home, she runs into Maria, who's out shopping for ingredients to make lunch. Maria's noticed how exhausted Takumi has been lately and wants to cheer him up with a nice meal. But when they get to Dagambo's workshop to check on him, they find him knocked out cold in a pile of wood. Panic sets in for a moment before Dagambo reassures them that Takumi is just asleep. Though, given how hard he's been working without rest, it's no surprise. The guy literally worked himself to exhaustion, but still had a smile on his face right up until he collapsed. They'll be fine for now, but Dagambo warns them if they don't make Takumi slow down, one day he might actually keel over for good. After his well-earned nap, Takumi wakes up and finally finishes his carriage. And oh boy, is he proud of himself. Rightfully so too, because he straight up broke the laws of physics to build this thing. From the outside, it looks like a regular carriage, but step inside and boom. It's basically a mansion on wheels. Takumi put a ton of effort into enchanting the carriage with spatial magic to expand the interior, packing it with all the comforts of home so even the longest journeys would be a breeze. Naturally, everyone piles in to take it for a test run. Maria behind the reins is having the time of her life. The carriage is moving at terrifying speeds, yet inside, there's barely any vibration, no motion sickness, just pure comfort. Takumi, being the considerate genius he is, tells Maria she can suggest anything else she'd like added to the carriage. Without missing a beat, Maria requests death spikes. Just because. Functional? Not at all. Cool? Absolutely. Takumi listens to her idea, nods thoughtfully, and then completely ignores it. And with that, they carry on, counting down the days until their upcoming trip. When the time finally comes, they roll up to the city gate, where Lion's Fong is waiting for them, their designated escort to the capital. Paypek and the others arrive soon after, and with everyone accounted for, it's time to hit the road. Before they leave though, Paypek, ever the curious businessman, asks if he can take a peek inside Takumi's carriage. Takumi, feeling generous, tells him to go ahead. The second Paypek steps inside and sees the sheer size of the place, he loses it. He immediately starts bombarding Takumi with questions, begging to know how he pulled this off and even offering a hefty sum for the secret. Before he can get too carried away, Lord Godwin steps in to reel him back, reminding him not to put Takumi in an awkward spot. But then, in true noble fashion, Godwin loudly declares how much he would love to own a carriage like Takumi's. Of course, he's not ordering Takumi to build one for him, but if Takumi were to gift him one, he'd be so grateful that he'd be willing to pay, let's say, 100 platinum coins. Takumi quickly does the math. 100 platinum is roughly 1 billion yen. That's an offer he definitely can't refuse. And so the group sets off on their journey. As they travel, Godwin discusses with his assistant just how valuable Takumi has become for the kingdom. He's certain that Takumi's talents will only continue to grow, but with that kind of success comes a whole lot of unwanted attention. while the king and Godwin will do their best to protect him from threats inside Barcula, dealing with the Empire of Sidonia is going to be another beast entirely. Speaking of Sidonia, we get a glimpse of the future, where Akane, one of the newly summoned heroes, is deep in research, combing through an old Sidonian history book. The book details how the Empire worships the goddess Inat, who, according to legend, created humanity in her image and made beastmen and elves specifically to serve mankind. Naturally, this ideology has led to beastmen being treated like absolute garbage in Sidonia. And Akane? Yeah, she's not okay with that. Back in Takumi's time, the group finally reaches the capital. Takumi is relieved they made it without any major incidents, though, to be fair, that's only because his party wiped out every monster that so much as thought about approaching them. Meanwhile, Lion's Fong? Yeah, they did absolutely nothing. Real top-tier bodyguarding, guys. As soon as they reach the inn, Pepek pulls Takumi aside to discuss a proposition. He wants to gift the king a carriage, just like the one Takumi made for himself. Lord Godwin agrees that it'd be a great way to showcase Takumi's abilities. But with only 5 days before their royal audience, Pepek figures they should wait until next time. To everyone's surprise, Takumi says he can get it done in time. He figures it'd be a hassle to build it after returning home, only to transport it all the way back, so he'd rather just knock it out now. The materials should be easy enough to find, but he'll need a place to work. Luckily, Pepek knows just the spot. The Palm Company. Later, Takumi fills Maria and Sophia in on the plan, and Sophia, knowing the Palm Company's reputation, confirms that it's one of the more reliable slave traders around, according to Mulan at least. Pepek secures permission for Takumi to use one of their old buildings as a workspace, and as soon as the materials arrive, he's ready to get started. One small problem: Sophia flat out refuses to let him dive into another grueling project without help. She insists he needs an assistant. He nearly worked himself into an early grave building the first carriage, and now he's about to do it again? Yeah, not happening. She demands he get a new slave to help him out. Takumi, realizing she and Maria are genuinely worried for him, agrees. The next day, he meets with the Palm Company's owner and requests a slave with magical aptitude to assist with alchemy. Meanwhile, outside, Maria is frantically running up to Sophia. Maple has vanished. The little troublemaker had mentioned exploring earlier, and if anyone inside spots a giant spider just chilling in the halls, there's going to be chaos. Sophia rushes to find her, but by the time she does, it's too late. Maple has already scared the life out of poor Reva, who was just trying to enjoy her book. Maple, realizing what she's done, quickly apologizes. Sophia sighs, helps Reva to her feet, and makes a mental note to keep a closer eye on their 8-legged friend. As Reva flips through the book in her hands, she catches a glance at the cover. Alchemy. Her curiosity sparks, and she can't help but ask if Reva is interested in the subject. That's all the invitation Reva needs to launch into an enthusiastic explanation about her love for alchemy, practically radiating excitement. A few minutes later, she's escorted into the meeting room to meet Takumi. Palong had recommended her as a solid candidate for what Takumi needed, so here she was. She greets him and takes a seat, prepared to discuss the job. Or at least that was the plan. Instead, as Takumi starts listing off the tasks, Reva is zoning out completely. Anxiety takes over, and all she can think about is how this is probably going to end in rejection. Again, no job, no money, and her family still struggling. Then, like a beacon of hope, Takumi casually mentions needing someone with a little knowledge in alchemy. The second Reva hears the word alchemy, she practically jumps out of her chair. This is her jam, her passion, her reason for existing. She gets so fired up that before she knows it, she and Takumi are deep in a discussion about their favorite alchemy methods and theories. Takumi, clearly impressed, decides to test her skills with a little quiz. With a dramatic flourish, he rips a page out of his journal and hands it over. "Tell me what this magic circle does," he says. Reva takes one look and immediately recognizes it as a recomposition circle for making sweets. But something about it is off, and that tiny, nagging detail spirals her into a full-on panic attack. Tears well up as she stammers that she doesn't know the answer. This isn't the exact candy spell she's familiar with. Surely she's failed. Surely he's going to toss her out like yesterday's leftovers. Except he doesn't. Instead, he extends his hand and invites her to join his party. Turns out, she was actually right about it being a candy-making circle. Takumi just uses slightly different ingredients. The fact that she figured it out so quickly, that was enough to impress him. Without hesitation, he tells her he'd love to have her on the team. With her employment finally secured, Palom drafts up the contract, and Reva lets out a sigh of relief. But before they wrap up, she makes one request. She wants all her wages sent back to her village. Her family is struggling, and she wants to make sure her little brother has a better life. Takumi, seeing no reason to refuse, agrees. Meanwhile, back in the kingdom of Sidonia, the king is brewing up plans for retaliation against Barkula for refusing to hand over Takumi. His strategy? Send the Holy Knights to make an example out of them. But the princess? She has a different idea. One that involves stirring up enough hatred to justify war. Back in Takumi's world, he's finishing up the synthesis of an adamantite framework for a carriage. Reva watches in awe, completely blown away by his skill. She volunteers to polish the frame, but her excitement quickly fades into doubt. She could never create something like this, could she? Takumi assures her that, despite appearances, his alchemy circles aren't that much harder than a simple candy spell. With some training, she'll get there. Why? Because the most important trait for an alchemist isn't skill, it's passion. Eventually, with Reva's help, Takumi completes the carriage. As he admires his handiwork, an old man casually strolls up beside him. "This yours?" the man asks. Takumi shrugs. "Made it, but I'm giving it to the king." Cue the rest of the crew running over, frantically calling for His Majesty. Takumi freezes. Wait, the king? The one he was just chatting with like a regular dude? Oh no. He braces for impact, but the king just waves him off. No need for formalities. Formal meetings are boring. Apparently, he'd been eager to meet Takumi, the genius who solved the kingdom's sewage problem with his toilet inventions. A reward was definitely in order, but throwing Takumi a grand banquet would attract unwanted attention, and the king knew Takumi wanted to stay off Sidonia's radar. Instead, he settles for giving Takumi a private reward. Later, as Takumi and his crew leave, the king watches from his window, instructing his attendants to keep Takumi's visit a secret. Of course, that's easier said than done. The moment Takumi's inventions start spreading, Sidonia will inevitably come knocking. Back at home, Takumi gathers his crew to discuss wages, only to be met with a bizarre twist. Maria and Sophia refuse to be paid. Maria insists that the food Takumi provides is more than enough, and Sophia, she doesn't see a need for money at all. Reva watches this chaos unfold like it's the best free entertainment she's had in weeks. Takumi tries to reason with them. Look, even if you don't need it now, saving money for the future is a good idea. Sophia, however, is unmoved. She's an elf, meaning she'll outlive Takumi by centuries. And when that time comes, she fully intends to spend the rest of her life watching over his grave. Takumi, blinking in sheer disbelief, turns to Maria. Surely she sees how ridiculous this is. But no, Maria is down for it too. She may not have elf-level longevity, but she's more than happy to dedicate her post-Takumi existence to grave watching. The sentiment is touching. Really, it is. But Takumi can't help but think, couldn't they plan for a future that doesn't involve eternal grave duty? Meanwhile, over in Sidonia, the princess has just received a troubling report. One of her spies managed to snag one of Takumi's purification devices, and she is not happy. How dare someone replicate holy magic instead of paying them for it? This blasphemy cannot stand. And since the devices originated from Bolton, she's sending a team to eliminate whoever is responsible. Back in Takumi's world, Reva suddenly asks him if she can register at the Adventurers Guild. Takumi, surprised, asks why. Her answer? She wants to help, just like Maria and Sophia. Plus, higher stats mean better alchemy. When she puts it like that, Takumi sees the logic and agrees. At the guild, Reva gets her adventurer's card, and the conversation quickly shifts to another pressing matter. Takumi's party still doesn't have a name. The guild insists that a group of their caliber needs an official name. Takumi, however, doesn't see the big deal. He never wanted to be an adventurer in the first place. That's when Barak shows up. Loud, boisterous, and entirely too enthusiastic. You need a name and a frontliner, he declares. I'll train you until you're the best. Takumi, very much not interested in that plan, protests. But Barak doesn't take no for an answer. The training begins immediately, and by training, we mean Barak enthusiastically yeeting Takumi across the training grounds. Takumi, battered, bruised, and desperately trying to think of a party name that isn't toilet-related, finally gives up. Maria, trying to be helpful, suggests a name, only for everyone to agree that she is somehow even worse at naming things than Takumi. Desperate, Takumi turns to Sophia, but she's too busy seething with rage over Barak's treatment of her master. She's already halfway to the guild, fists clenched, ready to throw hands. Takumi barely manages to stop her, explaining that painful as it was, Barak's training did improve his combat stats. Meanwhile, over in Sidonia, the other heroes are deep in training. Yamato is proving himself as a skilled warrior, but Akira? He's busy mocking him from the sidelines. Akane, growing more and more concerned, notices that both of them have changed since arriving. Something isn't right. And as she digs deeper, she begins uncovering troubling truths. Specifically, the doctrine of the Church of Divine Light, which preaches absolute human supremacy. But on the flip side, she also learns about the Church of Creation, which follows Nolan and treats everyone, human or demi-human, as equals. Sidonia is basically run by the Church of Divine Light, and if they summon heroes to bring world peace, you really gotta wonder what the royal family here has in mind for them. That's the kind of thought that gives you chills. Meanwhile, Takumi gifts Reva a ring and a staff since she wants to help with their adventuring. The ring helps her activate magic, and since she mentioned knowing how to use his staff, Takumi went ahead and made one from trait wood and some fancy mithril alloy. Reva is over the moon, but Maple? Not so much. She's pouting because Takumi never makes weapons for her. Luckily, this time, he did make one, and he even had Reva help craft it. Maple's jealousy quickly turns into gratitude, though you just know she's filing this moment away for future complaints. The next day, Takumi is back to training with Barak, and in a desperate attempt to escape, he tries to come up with a name for his party. His best effort? Cat's Claw, which, let's be honest, is just a knockoff of Lion's Fall. Barak isn't impressed, and rewards Takumi with an abdominal stretch hold. Maria tries to help by suggesting a name, but it's so bad that Barak immediately rejects it and slams Takumi to the ground instead. Team effort. Takumi is getting nervous that Sophia might go full rampage mode on Barak for using him as a human ragdoll. But after seeing the training in action, she realizes just how awful Takumi is at hand-to-hand combat. Instead of stopping it, she decides this punishment, training, is necessary. After a few hours of being tossed like a sack of potatoes, Takumi finally gets a break. But before he can even start savoring the sweet taste of freedom, Hans hits him with a question. "Want to take an escort mission?" Takumi isn't a fan of these. Too long, too tedious. But Barak points out that with his carriage and camellia, it'll only take 4 days. Plus, the request is from Papex Company, and helping him out could be beneficial. Takumi tries to pawn it off on Lion's Fong, but bad luck, they're busy. And since literally everyone else thinks it's a good idea, Takumi finds himself voluntarily accepting the mission. Off they go to the town of Kildas, escorting a merchant who immediately feels safer knowing they're on the job. He plans to sell necessities and purification devices, but he's also been asked to bring back some milk. Takumi is stunned. There's milk in this world? He's never seen any. Turns out, Bolton just doesn't sell it, but Kildas has all sorts of dairy delights, including cheese. Suddenly, Takumi is way more excited about this trip than he should be. When they arrive, he insists everyone try cream stew, and the reaction is unanimous. Delicious and completely new. Takumi, being Takumi, thinks he can make it even better. He decides they need to stock up on cheese and milk before heading back. Conveniently, Kilda's markets stay open at night, so he goes on a dairy shopping spree. As they enjoy their bounty, nostalgia kicks in. The taste of milk and cheese reminds Takumi of Japan, but he doesn't miss his old life at all. His new one is way better. Sophia notices him deep in thought and asks if he ever thinks about going back. She, for one, prefers the present. After spending 50 years cursed and trapped, the last thing she wants is to dwell on the past. Everyone else agrees, and Takumi gets it. This world gave him a fresh start, a chance to live freely. And it's all thanks to Nolan, which inspires him to finally pick a name for his party. The Wings of Nolan. Escort mission complete, they return to Bolton, only to find Takumi's mansion turned into a death trap. The whole room is filled with paralysis poison, and before Takumi even registers what's happening, the girls have been poisoned and captured by 2 masked men. One guy rushes Takumi with a knife, but right before impact, the blade gets yanked away by a web. Seizing the moment, Takumi counters and knocks the guy out. The second attacker charges, but Takumi effortlessly flips him over and takes him down too. The MVP, Maple, who saved him with her webs, he immediately thanks her. With the immediate threat neutralized, Takumi uses Cure to free the girls from the poison. Sophia, however, is drowning in guilt, apologizing for failing to protect him. Takumi reassures her it's not her fault. Only he and Maple have resistance to paralysis. Speaking of Maple, she casually mentions she found more intruders lurking around, so she tied them up. Just your average assassination attempt. Takumi sends Sophia to fetch Burak, who arrives and has the captured assassins taken away. He then drops a bombshell. Takumi should probably inform the Lord of Bolton because this attack screams Sidonia. Sure enough, after investigating, the Lord confirms it. The assassins were from the Divine Light Squadron, a special execution unit that eliminates anyone who becomes a problem for the Church of Divine Light. And guess what? Takumi is officially a problem. Why? The purification devices. Before, the kingdom relied on priests for holy magic purification. The Church of Creation did it for free, but the Church of Divine Light charged ridiculous fees. Now, thanks to Takumi's invention, their golden goose is cooked, and they want revenge. Takumi wonders if he should go into hiding, but the Lord reassures him that Bolton, being full of Creation Church followers, is the safest place for now. Extra night patrols will also be set up to prevent another assassination attempt. That takes care of the city. But what about Takumi's safety during his adventures? Takumi, ever the practical thinker, decides maybe it's time to pause adventuring for a bit. Burak, being Burak, immediately shuts that down. Takumi's party is top 5 in the guild, and if he stops, it'll mess with the guild's metrics. And Burak values those numbers more than Takumi's life. Sophia jumps in, swearing she'll protect Takumi with her life. Takumi, not wanting to argue with either of them, gets guilt-tripped into continuing. As they return to the guild, Takumi reflects. Sidonia is actively trying to kill him, and because of him, his friends were put in danger. He needs a solution. At the guild, Takumi and Sophia officially register their party name, but Hans warns him. Rumors about the attack are already spreading, and there's even talk of a bounty on Takumi's head. That means even some adventurers might come after him. Back home, Takumi breaks the bad news. Maria is furious. It's basically a guarantee they'll be attacked again. Takumi apologizes, but the girls tell him there's no need. They chose to stand by him, and they can handle anyone who tries to mess with them. Still, Takumi is worried, so he decides to create a magical barrier around the mansion that'll keep intruders out while they're home. But what about while they're out adventuring? Sophia suggests recruiting a tank for their party. Takumi agrees, but has no idea where to start looking. Sophia suggests checking solo adventurers, but trust is an issue. Instead, Takumi decides he might just buy a slave. That night, knights stand guard while Takumi burns the midnight oil, working on his barrier device. By morning, he ropes Reva into helping with alchemy. Sophia unexpectedly offers to help too. Takumi, grateful for the extra hands, assigns her to etch a magic circle onto a metal plate. As he pours magic powder onto the plate, Sophia asks if he got any sleep. The answer? Nope. He was too busy thinking about defense. Speaking of which, Maple and Camellia are in the background, running combat drills. Reva suddenly has a realization. Golems fall under alchemy, right? If Takumi could make one, it'd be the perfect tank. Unfortunately, golem cores require complex magic circles, and Takumi's skill level isn't there yet. He'll need a serious power-up before he can even attempt it. For now, he focuses on finishing the barrier. One spell later, the plates are bound with magic, and all that's left is to install them on the horse. Takumi suddenly gets a notification. His mana manipulation skill has maxed out and evolved into spell control. Maybe now he actually has a shot at creating a golem. Meanwhile, back in Sidonia, the king receives some rather unpleasant news. The Divine Light Squadron has been captured. Not only did they fail their mission to eliminate their target, but they got caught in the process. Talk about embarrassing. By now, Barkula has probably interrogated the assassins and figured out that Sidonia was behind it, making things way messier than the king anticipated. Elizabeth suggests they hit the pause button on attacking Barkula and instead focus on their other mission, the summoning circle. The king agrees and turns to Homer for an update on the ruined magic circles they found. Homer reports that while he couldn't fully analyze the magic circle, it still seems to be functional. All they have to do now is wait for it to accumulate enough power, about 2 months before they can summon their heroes. Back at Takumi's place, his first golem attempt, a complete and utter failure. Turns out creating multi-layered magic circles for the core is way harder than expected. Maple, ever the practical one, asks why he even wants a golem when they already have a powerful team. Takumi explains that having a golem guard the house while they go adventuring would be useful. Maple then drops a genius suggestion. Why not just find and tame a natural golem instead? Takumi is instantly on board and asks Sophia where he might find one. She tells him that stone golems are occasionally spotted around the Forest of Death, and if he's feeling adventurous, he might even find an iron golem in a dungeon. Wait, this world has dungeons. Takumi, somehow clueless about this, fumbles through an excuse. He decides they should check out a dungeon, but Sophia shoots that idea down fast. Without a proper tank in the team, tackling a dungeon is a disaster waiting to happen. Instead, they head to the rock flats to find a rock golem. When they finally spot one, it's a lot bigger than expected. Sophia identifies it as a Guardian-class golem, meaning its weak spot is its magic stone. But Takumi has no interest in killing it. He wants to tame it. Just as they're figuring out their next move, the golem turns in their direction and starts scanning the area. Sophia didn't expect it to have a scanning ability, and she's starting to think they're in over their heads. She suggests looking for a different golem, but Takumi, ever stubborn, insists that this is the golem. After all, having something this powerful guarding his house would scare off just about anyone. Without another thought, Takumi runs out to challenge the golem, but before the team can launch an attack, he notices something strange. It's not attacking him. Taking a gamble, he reaches out and realizes the golem radiates energy similar to Nolan's. That can only mean one thing. It was likely created to guard Nolan's ancient ruins. And if that's true, then maybe Nolan's blessing will make it friendly. Holding his breath, Takumi stretches out his hand and attempts to tame the golem. And it actually works. No fighting necessary. The girls are beyond impressed. Maple asks what he's going to name it, and after a moment of deep thought, Takumi dubs it Titan. Everyone welcomes Titan to the team, and it seems like he's trying to communicate something, but his massive body isn't exactly built for expressing himself. Takumi decides he'll make him a new, more flexible body. But before they leave, Sophia points out a slight issue. Bringing a giant golem back into town might cause, well, panic. Takumi is about to stash Titan in his pocket dimension, but before he can, Titan suddenly starts crumbling, only to reform himself into a much smaller rock golem. Problem solved. Now they can bring him into town without turning heads. Meanwhile, in a far-off future, Akane watches as her friends grow stronger and way more ruthless. They're now powerful enough to wipe out the entire knight squad of the castle, and they're having way too much fun mocking the fallen knights. Back at Takumi's place, the first thing he does is get to work designing Titan's new body. Before he can start construction, though, he calls everyone together for a serious discussion. He announces that he's dissolving all the contracts he has with them. The room falls into stunned silence. The girls demand to know why, and Takumi explains that as long as they stay with him, they'll always be in danger. He doesn't want them to get hurt because of him. He's been thinking about this ever since their first major attack, and he's certain it's for the best. The girls argue that if they leave, who's going to protect him? Takumi reassures them that he still has Titan, Maple, and Camellia, so they don't have to worry. He wants them to live safely somewhere else, and to make sure of that, he's giving them a hefty sum of money so they can live comfortably for a while. Maria, however, is not having it. She jumps up, points her spear at him, and demands to know why he always puts everyone else's well-being ahead of his own. Takumi tries to explain, but she cuts him off. If he truly cares about them, he should want them to stand and fight alongside him, no matter what. Takumi is left speechless. Maria, tears streaming down her face, apologizes for threatening him, but confesses she has no idea what she'd do if she wasn't by his side. Sophia steps in, trying to calm Maria down. She tells Takumi that while they understand his concern, asking them to abandon him after everything they've been through is cruel. They all swore loyalty to him, and they meant it. Finally, Takumi gets it. He apologizes for trying to force his decision on them without considering their feelings. One last time, he asks if they truly want to stay with him, despite all the dangers they might face. Without hesitation, they all vow to stay by his side, no matter what. With that settled, Takumi goes back to work on Titan's new body. The end result? Spectacular. Titan now has an adamantite skeleton, mithril armor, and every weapon Takumi could cram in. And the best part? A giant mech suit that little Titan can control from the inside. Takumi has basically built himself a real-life Gundam, and he could not be happier. Meanwhile, up in the heavens, Nolan watches all of this unfold, probably a little jealous of Takumi's giant mech. But she doesn't have time to dwell on it. One of her subordinates approaches with bad news. There are signs that Annette, the so-called god worshipped by the Church of Divine Light, is starting to manifest. Normally, gods don't just appear out of nowhere, but thanks to years of worship, their collective belief has given birth to a net. And unfortunately, because their faith is, well, questionable at best, Annette is on the verge of becoming an evil god. To make matters worse, Sidonia is the one responsible for summoning heroes, meaning that once those heroes grow strong enough, they could easily spark a war. Nolan knew this was a possibility, but she can't intervene directly. That's why she placed Takumi in this world, blessing him with so much power. From here on out, the story continues as we see a group of villagers who were forced to abandon their homes after a bunch of nobles made the place completely unlivable. Naturally, this led to all the villagers developing an intense hatred for nobility, especially Moni, who lost her husband due to the careless actions of the nobles. If glaring at the mention of nobility were a sport, Moni would be an Olympic champion. A year after that incident, the Lord is reviewing the report on it. Apparently, the refugees were taken in by a noble named Rockford, but he's now in over his head. Turns out feeding and housing 1,000 people isn't exactly pocket change. So he's asking for help to relocate them. The problem? There's only one piece of land big enough for all of them, and it's currently a monster-infested nightmare. Developing that area is about as easy as trying to bathe a cat. With no other options, the Lord decides to do the only logical thing. Dump the problem on Takumi. Meanwhile, Takumi and his party are gearing up to go dungeon exploring. Takumi has been itching to check out dungeons for a while, and he finally settled on one known as the Forest of the Beast King, the second most difficult dungeon in the kingdom. Despite being underground, it looks like an actual forest, complete with towering trees and a lovely atmosphere that's immediately ruined by the ridiculously strong monsters. Luckily, they have Maple as the scout and Titan as the designated punching bag, taking all the big hits. Thanks to this setup, they manage to defeat the floor bosses without too much trouble and loot the treasure chests. It takes them an entire day to reach the final floor, and everyone is hyped for the last battle. Sophia is just relieved they made it this far without suffering serious injuries, while Takumi claims it's all thanks to their skill and strategic planning, only to immediately step on a trap. Cue a massive boulder hurtling toward them. Takumi yells for everyone to retreat, and they all run for their lives, diving into a small room that the boulder, thankfully, can't fit into. Just as they start to breathe again, the door behind them slams shut, leaving them with only one way forward. Suspicious? Absolutely. Eventually, they find themselves in a massive chamber, and Takumi starts getting the distinct feeling they've been herded here like livestock. Sure enough, out comes the final boss, an S-rank rock dragon. Takumi really wishes he had brought his giant Titan mech, but alas, he left it at home. As the dragon lunges, he yells for everyone to run. The only way they'll get an opening to attack is if they stop the dragon's tail from turning them into pancakes. Takumi tells Titan and Maple to hold it down. Titan grabs the tail, wrestling with it like he's in some kind of fantasy WWE match, while Maple secures it to the ground with her webs. With the tail pinned, Sophia charges in and starts stabbing aggressively, making the dragon scream in pain. Taking this golden opportunity, everyone unleashes their strongest magic attacks. But the dragon refuses to die. Sophia shouts that its weak point is the midsection. So, Takumi calls Chamiya and has her charge straight into the dragon's stomach. The attack lands a solid hit, and Takumi sees the perfect chance to finish it off. He rushes in for the final strike, only to immediately remember that he doesn't want to be barbecued alive by its fire breath. Thinking fast, he enchants his sword with magic and yeets it straight into the dragon's mouth. The dragon lets out a final, dramatic roar before disintegrating into sparkles, leaving behind a treasure chest. Dungeon cleared. As a bonus, Takumi finds a dragon scale and immediately starts thinking of all the cool stuff he can make with it. After returning to Bolton, Takumi is immediately summoned by Marcus Godwin. The moment he steps into the mansion, Godwin asks him, "Are you familiar with the uninhabited land to the south?" Takumi recalls that it's basically a monster-infested wasteland that even neighboring nations refuse to deal with. The kingdom of Triara once tried to conquer it, but failed so miserably that they'd probably pretend it never happened. Godwin, in all seriousness, tells Takumi, "I need you to build a village there." Takumi stares at him, wondering if he heard that right. Build a village? In Monsterland? Godwin, clearly prepared for this reaction, reminds him about the giant wall Takumi built in mere minutes at another village. If anyone can make a livable place in a hostile wasteland, it's him. Sophia, however, is not thrilled. She reminds Godwin that Takumi still has a bounty on his head from Sidonia. Godwin acknowledges this, but insists that the situation is desperate. The refugees have been stuck in limbo for too long, and they need a permanent home. That's all Takumi needs to hear. Without hesitation, he accepts the challenge. Sophia tries to change his mind, pointing out the obvious dangers, but Takumi is set on this. When he first arrived, he had no home either, yet the villagers took him in. Now, it's his turn to do the same for the refugees. And so, Operation Build a Village begins. Takumi, his party, and a squad of knights set out to construct the settlement. First, he builds the roads, then uses magic to summon a massive rock wall around the area, even digging a giant moat to keep monsters out. Raver strengthens the walls, Maria works on the roads, and within just 10 days, the place is starting to look like an actual village. With everything set, Takumi asks Sophia to return to Bolton and inform Godwin that they're ready to receive the refugees. Sophia hops on Camellia and rushes back. When Godwin hears the news, he cannot believe they managed to build a functioning village in 10 days. Sure, it's not luxurious, but it's livable. That's more than anyone expected. With that, the order is given to relocate the refugees. As they march toward their new home under night escort, the villagers are skeptical, to say the least. They're heading into the southern frontier, aka Monsterland, and that alone is enough to give them anxiety. They also assume that the guy who built the village must be just another selfish noble who sees them as disposable labor. As they pull up to the village, the knight captain is absolutely floored by the sheer magnitude of the village walls. "This isn't a village," he mutters. "It's a fortress." The convoy crosses the drawbridge and enters the village, where they are greeted by Takumi. The knight captain, still processing what he's seeing, asks Takumi what on earth is going on. Takumi casually explains that he surrounded the village with ramparts and a massive gate for security. "As long as we don't get attacked by a dragon or something with wings, we should be fine," he says, completely unfazed. "Also, there's a castle on that hill over there," Takumi adds nonchalantly. "You know, just in case any officials come to visit." The knight captain blinks. Takumi nods, then continues his list. "We've got homes for everyone moving in, barracks for the knights, and I even built a sewage system, complete with purification devices. No more dumping waste into the river like savages." The knight captain takes a deep breath, trying to process all of this. "Takumi," he says slowly, "you were asked to build a village. This is a military stronghold. How did you do all this so fast?" The villagers who had been skeptical before now stare at their new home in awe. They may have doubted Takumi before, but seeing the place now, they can't believe their luck. However, one person remains unimpressed, Mani. Sophia notices Mani standing on a hill looking gloomy and decides to approach her. "Hey, are you here alone? My husband died in my old village." Sophia offers her condolences and realizes that tending the fields alone must be tough for Mani. "If you're open to it, I might have a different kind of work for you." Mani raises an eyebrow. "Oh," Sophia hesitates. "My master is the one who built this village. He's been really busy, so he needs someone to take care of his needs." Mani stares at her. Realizing how that sounded, Sophia quickly waves her hands. "Not like that. I mean, cooking and cleaning, since Maria is busy with construction too." After much convincing, Sophia brings Mani to meet Takumi. They gather in Takumi's house to discuss the details. Takumi smiles at her. "If you're okay with it, I'd love to have you help take care of us. Of course, I'll pay you a fair wage." Mani, however, remembers the betrayal she faced in her old village. She clenches her fists. "I vowed never to trust another noble again. Things may look good now, but sooner or later you'll cause the villagers great despair, just like all the others." Maria immediately jumps to Takumi's defense, but Mani isn't swayed. She refuses the job and leaves. But as she walks away, doubt creeps in. Maybe she had been too harsh. Maybe insulting the one guy who built an entire village fortress in record time wasn't the best idea. She figures Takumi will kick her out now. She decides to leave before that happens. However, just as she enters the forest, she encounters a massive horde of monsters. "Oh," she says, "I have made a terrible mistake." Back in the village, Maple suddenly stiffens. "Takumi, I sense a huge horde of monsters approaching the village. A lot of them." The villagers panic. "We're going to die." Takumi claps his hands. "Not happening." "Knight Captain, raise all the drawbridges. As long as they don't have wings, we're good." Meanwhile, outside, Mani is sprinting back to the village like her life depends on it. because it does. She sees the drawbridge being raised. Oh, come on! Inside the village, the knight captain suddenly remembers. Wasn't Mani outside the gates? The realization hits Takumi like a ton of bricks. He refuses to let anyone get hurt. Without hesitation, he jumps onto Titan and flies over the walls. Mani, meanwhile, has been cornered by 2 bush wolves. She closes her eyes, resigning herself to her fate. But at the last second, Takumi swoops in and snatches her away. You can relax now, he tells her, cutting the wolves in half with a single slash. Still in shock, stammers, there are more out there. Not a problem, Takumi says confidently. My friends are handling it. Right on cue, Sophia and the others return, announcing that all the monsters have been taken care of. Mani stares at Takumi, realization dawning. He wasn't like the nobles she had known. He actually cared. She bows her head. I was wrong about you. If you'll still have me, I would like to accept the job. Takumi grins. Welcome to the team. Meanwhile, the knight captain returns to Bolton and reports to Godwin about the incredible work Takumi has done. Godwin is impressed, but wonders if the fortress will be enough to secure their position against Sidonia. Over in Sidonia, the king receives a report about the newly built fortress near Barula. He is furious when he learns that this is the work of the same alchemist who has been causing trouble for them. However, Elizabeth reassures him that it won't be a problem for long. The summoning circle has gathered enough mana. It's time to summon the heroes. A massive wave of mana sweeps across the land, reaching all the way to Takumi and his village. As they sit down for lunch, they suddenly feel a sickening surge of mana. Takumi sets down his fork. Oh, that's not good. He remembers that Nolan told him he had been sent 1 year into the past from when the heroes would be summoned. And judging by the ominous energy in the air, yep, he mutters, they're here. Fast forward 3 months after the heroes were summoned, and they had all reached A rank. Nolan is already anticipating Sidonia's next move, and like clockwork, Elizabeth calls the heroes for a big announcement. She declares it's time to introduce the world to its new heroes, and she's taking them on a tour to showcase their power. Akira and Yamato are practically vibrating with excitement at the thought of being hailed as heroes, while Akane is over here pretending to be thrilled while secretly side-eyeing Elizabeth and the king. Meanwhile, over on Takumi's end, his village has officially been named Wedge Fort and is booming with merchants and craftsmen setting up shop. Out in the forest, Sophia is on her usual monster-slaying spree when Maple shows up, dragging some weird creature behind her. Sophia immediately recognizes it as a bush lizard and is now officially concerned because the monsters in this area are leveling up way too fast. She reports her worries to the team, who offer to help, but Sophia is like, nah, I got this. What really bugs her is why the monsters are suddenly getting stronger. She suspects it might have something to do with that massive energy fluctuation they felt 3 months ago. Takumi, remembering what Nolan said about the hero summoning, knows he needs to keep his guard up, but also has no clue what to expect. Later that evening, the knight captain informs Takumi that Barok is summoning him for a quest. Before heading back, he asks if anything spicy happened in Bolton while he was gone. The knight shrugs and says, not really, but rumor has it 3 heroes popped up in Sidonia. The whole gang gathers to discuss this, and since they don't know the real story, Maria assumes Nolan must have summoned the heroes to Sidonia to keep them in check. Takumi, on the other hand, knows better. Sidonia is still as corrupt as ever, so all he can do is cross his fingers and hope these new heroes aren't complete menaces to society. Spoiler alert, they are. Over in Sidonia, Akira and Yamato are proving themselves to be grade-A scumbags. As they prepare to board their carriage, Yamato sneers, wondering if they really have to bring that filthy demi-human along. Lulu, bless her heart, apologizes for existing, which only annoys Yamato further. Akane, being the only decent person in this group, defends Lulu, but Akira chimes in with his enlightened opinion that demi-humans are basically just slaves. However, since Akane is so attached to Lulu, he generously allows her to ride with them. Before they depart, Elizabeth and the king say a dramatic prayer to Anat, and even if that deity wasn't real before, she sure as hell is now. Back in Bolton, Takumi and crew ask Hans for intel on the new heroes. Hans spills that there are 2 boys and 1 girl, all with black hair, which makes Takumi immediately suspect they're fellow Japanese. Apparently, their reason for traveling is to visit all the churches in Barula. The real reason? Probably something much less wholesome, like destroying them. Meanwhile, Peck requests Takumi's party to escort him to the royal capital, and since it's Peck asking, Takumi agrees. As they prep for the mission, Moni asks if she can come along. Takumi, ever the responsible one, points out that escort missions are dangerous, and Moni has all the combat skills of a decorative houseplant. Moni, undeterred, pulls the classic "but I'll be lonely" card, backed up by Maria and Sophia. Seeing his resolve weakening, Moni throws in the ultimate weapon, puppy dog eyes. Takumi folds like a cheap deck chair and agrees, on the condition that she sticks close to Maria or Ra. Now they just have to register her as an adventurer. Meanwhile, in the hero's carriage, Akira and Yamato are grumbling about the lack of suspension. Akira mentions that Barula has a newfangled carriage with actual suspension, and also, fun fact, Barula has a ton of elves. This somehow leads to them casually discussing elf trafficking, because of course, it does. The knight captain reminds them that Barula has strict laws against slave trading, but Akira and Yamato could not care less. They're level 30 adventurers, which in their minds makes them untouchable. Akane, now physically nauseous, knows she has to do something before they go full villain. A few days later, Takumi completes his escort mission and heads to the guild. The receptionist congratulates him, Sophia, and Maria on their promotion to A rank, while Moni moves up to D rank. But before they can celebrate, a commotion erupts at the back of the guild. The heroes have arrived. Akira, ever the people's champion, demands everyone clear the way. When someone dares to breathe in his direction, he punches the poor guy. And just when things couldn't get worse, Akira and Yamato spot Takumi with his beautiful slaves, and immediately assume he's some low-tier adventurer. Akira, oozing arrogance, demands that Takumi hand over the women. Takumi, unsurprisingly, does not. Instead, he gives them a single chance to walk away. But Akira, being Akira, pulls out his sword and lunges. Takumi, without breaking a sweat, dodges and uses alchemy to shatter Akira's weapon. Yamato charges in next, only to get flipped like a pancake. Akane watches in awe as Takumi effortlessly mops the floor with these two morons. Akira, now both humiliated and swordless, swears revenge. Takumi, who has had enough of this nonsense, reminds Akira that not only did he just get his ass handed to him, but drawing a sword in the guild is a major offense. Akira, realizing he's in deep trouble, storms off in a huff, still vowing vengeance. Once they're gone, Akane rushes over to apologize for her companions. Takumi assures her it's unnecessary, she didn't do anything wrong. Introducing herself properly, Akane feels like she's finally found the person she's been looking for. Before she can say more, Lulu reminds her it's time to leave. Takumi, sensing she has more to say, subtly tells her to meet him at the lakeside hotel that night. Later, Takumi fills his group in on his encounter with the heroes. The consensus? These guys are the worst. But Akane seemed decent, which is why he invited her to talk. The only problem? How is she supposed to sneak away from her Sidonian escorts? Turns out, she didn't. Now Akane and Lulu are running for their lives from Sidonian guards. Just when things look grim, Sophia swoops in, knocking one guard unconscious, while Maple drags another off into the abyss. Sophia then escorts Akane to the hotel, where she finally reunites with Takumi. With no guards on their tail, for now, she cuts to the chase and asks the million-dollar question. Are you Japanese? Takumi, ever cautious, dodges the question. He can't risk Sidonia learning the truth, but Akane swears she won't tell anyone, and now Takumi has a choice to make. Takumi thinks Akane can be trusted, so he spills the beans. Yep, he's Japanese, and the reason he's here is tied to the heroes being summoned. His party members are thrown for a loop because this is the first time he's ever mentioned anything like this. Seriously, dude? Keeping secrets much? But at this point, hiding it any longer would be like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel. So, he just lays it all out. Before diving into his story, Takumi has everyone swear on their honor, and probably their next meal, to keep this secret. Once they all agree, he explains everything that happened before he got yeeted into this world. He braces for them to call him crazy, but they actually find it pretty easy to believe. I mean, considering all the weird magic and monsters around, a guy from another world isn't even top 5 weirdest things they've heard. From everything Takumi has shared, one thing is clear. Sidonia is the bad guy here, and the fact that they have the heroes, yeah, that's a disaster waiting to happen. Akane wonders if Sidonia is planning to start a war, but Takumi points out that while that's definitely an option, Akira and Yamato are about as war-ready as a couple of wet noodles. More likely, Sidonia plans to use them as influencers, but like the dangerous kind. Even if they don't start a war, just the hero's presence could boost the influence of the Church of Divine Light, which is a whole different kind of headache. Akane, feeling guilty, apologizes for dragging Takumi into this mess, but he waves it off. Not your fault, he says. We all got Hiskide here thanks to Sidonia's nonsense. But speaking of that, if Akira and Yamato are from Japan too, There's no way they could have been such absolute trash humans before arriving here. Something must have happened, so he asks Akane, what the hell happened to them? Akane sighs. She has no idea. Before coming here, Akira and Yamato were actually decent people. But ever since they started training in Sidonia, their personalities took a nosedive off a cliff. Takumi squints suspiciously. This reeks of mind control shenanigans. He asks if they ever ate anything weird. Akane isn't sure, but she mentions that she never trusted Sidonia, so she always used purification magic on her food before eating it. The others, not so much. Meaning, they could have been drugged and brainwashed. This realization hits Akane like a ton of bricks. She immediately drops to her knees and begs Takumi to save her and Lulu. She can't go back to Sidonia. Not now, not ever. Takumi sighs and tells her to get up. Come on, you don't need to beg. You're a fellow Japanese girl. Of course, I'm gonna help you. With that settled, the group heads back to Takumi's mansion in Bolton. One quick carriage ride, Freudian slip, they arrive. To lift Akane's spirits, Maria whips up some cream stew. The moment Akane takes a bite, she nearly ascends to another plane of existence. It's been so long since she's had food this good, she actually starts crying. Meanwhile, Takumi sits back, feeling like Gordon Ramsay for indirectly causing an emotional breakdown over stew. While they're enjoying their meal, trouble is brewing elsewhere. Over at Wedge Fort, a guard on duty notices something funky going on in the forest. He squints. Yep, that's not just something funky. That's a full-blown monster stampede. The guy immediately sprints off to sound the alarms, probably questioning every life decision that led him to this moment. Back at Takumi's place, Akane and Lulu head to bed, while Takumi busies himself in his workshop with Rava. He plans to talk to the king about Akane and Lulu later, but for now, they're safe. And speaking of plans, he's got something important to do. He calls all the girls together and, with a dramatic pause, announces that he's dissolving everyone's slave contracts. Cue immediate heartbreak. Wait, what? The girls start panicking, thinking Takumi is trying to abandon them again, but he quickly reassures them that's not what's happening. He's about to dive headfirst into more danger than ever before, and he knows they're willing to stick by his side no matter what, so he doesn't want them bound to him by some contract. He wants them to stand beside him as equals. A true family. With that settled, Takumi gets back to work in his workshop and finally completes the 2 legendary swords he's been crafting. But before he can even test them, a notice from the guild arrives. He reads it and immediately regrets it. The emergency in Wedge Fort is bad. Like, really bad. And we pause here because cliffhangers are fun. Want to know what happens next? Subscribe to the channel and turn on that notification bell.